Alright, we want to go to this URL and download the latest Betaflight Configurator 10.6.0, and it tells you which file to choose based on your operating system. I'm running Windows 10, so I'm going to grab this one, win32.exe, scroll down, Betaflight Configurator 10.6.0, win32.exe, download that. It's downloading over here. Then I'm going to cut and paste that to the folder I've made, Betaflight Configurator. Paste. Double click on that. I agree. Sure. Alright, once it's installed, you click Finish. And now right underneath this Betaflight, you see that we've got Configurator 10.6.0 installed. We're good to go. Now that we've got the correct Configurator 10.6.0 or newer installed, we connect our quadcopter with the props off to the computer using the USB cable. Go to our CLI tab. Down here in the command line interface, we type our command here, and we're going to type in dump all. And it's going to dump all of the information on the flight controller. We're going to scroll up, and underneath this word version, you'll have the version of Betaflight that's currently installed on your flight controller. In my case, I've got 4.1.5 dated 16 March 2020. Which is good for Betaflight RPM filter use. You want to have Betaflight 4.1 or later. The target board name is Omnibus F4FW, and the reason I point that out is if this were not 4.1 or later, we would need to flash new firmware to the flight controller, and we would need to know what this target board name is in order to do that. I'm going to pretend that I need to flash new firmware to the flight controller in order to implement our Betaflight RPM filtering. So let's just assume hypothetically that this number is lower than Betaflight 4.1. What we want to do is from version on down, highlight it and make sure that you copy and paste all of this information to a Word file and save it somewhere on your computer where you know where it's at. So I copy and paste it to a Word file, paste. On my Word document, text doesn't show up until I highlight it and change it to black. And then you want to save this information somewhere on your computer where you can locate it later, because you can always just copy and paste this information back into the CLI, hit return, and then type the word save and hit return, and it'll restore all of this information back to your flight controller should you need to do so. So let's say we want to update our firmware because this is not 4.1 or later. We need to know that our Omnibus F4FW is our target board name, and we go to Update Firmware. And it picks up that our target board is the Omnibus F4FW Airbot, which is good. And we want to select the latest firmware version for that target, which is 4.1.5, dated the 16th of March 2020. So we select that, we load the firmware online, and then we flash the firmware. It says programming failed. So what I need to do is I need to close out all of my other tabs that I have open, and we'll try it again. If this happens, what I'll do is I'll disconnect the quadcopter from the computer, close out everything, and run the Impulse RC driver fixer with the quadcopter reconnected to the computer. Click yes, and it'll search for the flight controller, enter the bootloader mode, and install the DFU driver. And this is a good sign. So now we go back to our Betaflight configurator, update firmware, Omnibus F4FW. Select the latest firmware version for that. That's 4.1 or greater. We've already loaded it online, and now we'll flash firmware. It's erasing what was on there, and now it's flashing. You do not want to disconnect the quadcopter or stop this process while this is going on. If you do so, it could cause problems, which are either very difficult or impossible to recover from. And it says programming successful. That's a good thing. So now we've just installed Betaflight 4.1 to our flight controller by flashing and updating our firmware using the Betaflight Configurator 10.6.0. And that's how you flash firmware to your flight controller using Betaflight.